There is a woman sitting in a hospital parking lot at 2 in the morning who has not cried in 6 months. Not because nothing happened. Everything happened. Her marriage ended. Her best friend stopped calling. Her mother said she was too emotional, too needy, too much, and so she swallowed it. She learned to be smaller. She learned to stop feeling. And now she sits in a parking lot at 2 in the morning, completely numb, wondering if she is finally fixed. She is not fixed. She is starving. And if you have ever sat in a parking lot like that, or a bathroom floor, or a silent car in a driveway, too exhausted to go inside, then what I am about to tell you is going to change the way you understand your entire life. Because here is the thing nobody told you. The sensitivity you spent years trying to kill. The depth that everyone called a problem. The way you absorb a room's energy before you even take off your coat. That is not your weakness. That is a neurological gift that most human beings will never develop. And the reason it broke you is not because you had too much of it. It is because nobody ever taught you what it actually is, or what to do with it when the world treats it like a disorder. I want to talk to you today about what happens inside the psychology of a person who feels deeply, gets broken by that feeling, and then comes out the other side of that darkness carrying something that most people will spend their entire lives searching for and never find. And before we go anywhere, I need you to understand one thing. The fact that you are still here, still listening, still trying to understand yourself, that is not weakness. That is the most important data point I can give you. Because the people who truly have nothing left do not search for answers. You are searching, which means something in you already knows there is more to this story. So let us start at the beginning, not your beginning, the beginning of the pattern. Psychologists who study what they call high emotional sensitivity have found something extraordinary. People who score in the top 15% for empathic ability, the ones who feel other people's emotions almost as physically as their own, these people share a disproportionate history of early emotional invalidation. What that means in plain language is this. The people who feel the most deeply are usually the ones who grew up in environments where feeling was punished. Think about what that does to a developing mind. You have a child who is wired to be exquisitely sensitive to emotional atmosphere, who picks up on a parent's tension before a single word is spoken, who cries at commercials at age 5 and feels genuine grief when an animal is hurt. And into that wiring, the world delivers one consistent message. Stop feeling so much. You are too sensitive. Stop crying. Toughen up. You are overreacting. So the child does what children do to survive. They start to wall it off. They build internal architecture designed not to feel less, because they cannot feel less. The wiring does not change, but to hide the feeling, to manage it, to make sure it never inconveniences anyone again. And this is the origin wound. This is the crack in the foundation. Not the feeling itself, the shame about the feeling. Now here is where it gets critically important, and this is the part most people never hear. When you spend years suppressing a natural and powerful internal capacity, it does not disappear. It goes underground. And underground, cut off from your conscious awareness, it starts operating on its own, without your direction, without your discernment, without any of the protective intelligence you would normally apply to it. So what happens? You start feeling everyone else's emotions but losing track of your own. You absorb the pain of people around you and confuse it with your personal emotional state. Someone in the room is anxious, and you suddenly feel a dread you cannot explain. Someone is angry at you, and your entire nervous system floods with shame, even when you have done nothing wrong. You are running on someone else's emotional fuel, and you do not even know it. This is the first thing I want you to name clearly. This experience, this feeling of being a sponge with no filter, this is not what your sensitivity is supposed to do. This is what your sensitivity does when it has been injured and never taught how to function properly. It is the difference between a river and a flood. The same water, completely different relationship to the banks. Now we are going to go somewhere that most videos in this space will not go, because it is uncomfortable. But it is the most important part. There is a version of the empath identity that has become a trap. And I say this with complete compassion, not judgment. In communities built around empathy and sensitivity, there is a quiet story that circulates. It goes something like this. You feel deeply because you are special. Other people are less conscious, less spiritually developed, less aware. The narcissists and the users and the takers are drawn to you because your light attracts them, and your suffering is evidence of your gift. Now, parts of that story contain real truth, But the version that circulates most often leaves out the most critical element. And what it leaves out is this: your sensitivity is not just something that happens to you. It is something you can develop agency over. You are not simply a vessel that the universe fills and empties at will. You are a person with a nervous system, with psychological patterns, with a history that has shaped your responses, and with the capacity to reshape those responses. When the empath identity becomes a story that explains your suffering without asking you to change anything, it becomes a cage built from very beautiful words. I want to tell you about a psychological mechanism called the repetition compulsion. It was first described by Freud but has been confirmed and expanded by modern trauma researchers, including Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, whose work on the body and trauma is some of the most important psychology of the last 50 years. The repetition compulsion is the unconscious drive to recreate familiar emotional experiences, even when those experiences are painful. Your nervous system learns patterns in childhood. It learns what a relationship feels like, what safety feels like, what love feels like. And then for the rest of your life, it seeks out experiences that match those templates, because familiar, even when painful, registers as safe to the nervous system. This is why the person who grew up with an emotionally unavailable parent repeatedly falls for emotionally unavailable partners. This is why the person whose feelings were constantly dismissed ends up surrounded by people who dismiss their feelings. This is why the empath who was taught that love means sacrifice keeps finding people who need to be rescued. This is not fate, this is neurobiology. And the reason this matters so much is because the moment you understand it as a pattern, it loses some of its power over you. Now I want to stay with this for a moment because I know some of you are uncomfortable right now. Some of you are thinking that this sounds like I am blaming you, that I am saying the painful relationships in your life are your fault. That is not what I am saying. What I am saying is something far more empowering. I am saying that your nervous system has been running a program that was installed before you were conscious enough to choose it, and that you now have enough awareness to look at that program and decide whether you want to keep running it. That is not blame. That is the beginning of power. Because here is what changes when a deeply sensitive person does the internal work of understanding their own patterns. And I mean truly understanding them, not intellectually knowing about them, but feeling them, tracing them back to their origin, sitting with the grief of recognizing where they came from. What changes is this: the world stops being a place that keeps mysteriously hurting you, and starts being a place you can navigate with your eyes fully open. The empath who has done this work walks into a room differently. They can feel the emotional atmosphere. That gift is still fully present, but they are no longer swept away by it. They can stand in someone else's storm without drowning in it. They can feel another person's pain without absorbing it into their own body as if it belongs to them. That distinction between resonance and merger is the difference between a gift and a wound. And now I want to introduce you to something that most conversations about sensitivity never touch. And this is where the real psychological depth lives. Carl Jung called it the shadow. And before your mind goes to anything mystical or abstract, let me give you the most practical definition possible. Your shadow is the collection of everything about yourself that you decided was unacceptable and pushed out of conscious awareness. For highly sensitive people, the shadow is typically enormous, because when your emotional experience is constantly being told it is too much, you learn to push enormous amounts of yourself underground. What usually ends up in the shadow of a sensitive person? Anger. Real, clean, appropriate anger at genuine mistreatment, pushed down because anger was not safe, was not allowed, was not what good sensitive people feel. Selfishness. The ability to want things for yourself, to put your own needs first sometimes, to say I matter and my time matters and my energy matters, buried under layers of compulsive giving. Judgment. The clear-eyed capacity to look at a person or a situation and say that is not good for me. That person is not trustworthy. This dynamic is unhealthy, suppressed in favor of endless compassion. These are not dark things. These are functional human capacities. But in the psychology of someone raised to believe that their value comes from how much they give, how much they feel, how much they absorb, these capacities feel dangerous. So they go underground. And underground they do not disappear. They work against you. The anger you cannot feel consciously becomes chronic anxiety or mysterious physical symptoms. The selfishness you cannot acknowledge consciously becomes resentment that slowly poisons your closest relationships. The judgment you have silenced becomes you ignoring every warning signal your gut sends you about unsafe people. This is the shadow at work. Not evil, not supernatural, just human psychology operating without your awareness. Now here is the moment where this entire conversation pivots. Because this is the part that most sensitive people, when they really absorb it, describe as the most important thing they have ever understood about themselves. The darkness you survived, the relationships that broke you, the periods of numbness, of complete shutdown, of sitting in parking lots at 2 a.m. unable to feel anything. These were not random suffering. They were your psyche's attempt to force a confrontation with everything you had pushed into the shadow. When life breaks you open in those moments, the defenses come down. The carefully maintained image of the eternally giving, endlessly patient, deeply spiritual, compassionate person starts to crack. And through those cracks, for the first time, you can see what is actually underneath. You can see the anger. You can see the hunger to be seen and chosen and valued for your own sake, not for what you provide. You can see the part of you that is not gentle and flowing, but fierce and boundaried and capable of saying no with every cell of your body. That emergence is not your brokenness. That is your becoming. And I want to be specific here about what this looks like in practice. Because I have described a psychological concept, and now I want to make it real. A person who has done this integration process, who has taken what the darkness forced them to confront and actually metabolized it, they do not become less sensitive. They do not become cold or guarded or emotionally armored. What they become is grounded. They become someone who can feel everything, all of it, the joy and the grief and the rage and the tenderness, and remain centered in themselves while feeling it. They become someone whose presence in a painful situation is genuinely stabilizing to other people. Not because they are performing calmness, but because they have genuinely descended into their own abyss and found bedrock. This is what genuine emotional intelligence actually looks like at its fullest development. Not someone who processes everything perfectly and never gets triggered. Someone who knows the terrain of their own interior well enough to navigate almost any emotional weather. When a psychologically aware, deeply sensitive person goes through genuine breaking, and by breaking I mean the kind of experience that strips away your comfortable self-concept and leaves you unable to perform the version of yourself you have always presented to the world, something extraordinary becomes available. Not automatically, not without effort, but available. What becomes available is the integration of the full self. Most people, highly sensitive or not, spend their entire lives presenting a curated version of themselves to the world, while the rest of themselves, the uncomfortable parts, the contradictory parts, the dark parts, live underground. The breaking event, when engaged with consciously rather than medicated or bypassed or spiritually skipped over, is the moment when that curated self becomes unsustainable, and the full self, messy and complex and genuinely human, begins to surface. People who have gone through this process and done the work to understand it describe a very specific set of changes in how they experience the world. They describe feeling, for the first time, like they are actually inside their own life rather than watching it from a slightly disconnected vantage point. The chronic low-level dissociation that many sensitive people live with, the sense of being slightly outside yourself, watching yourself interact with the world, begins to resolve as the shadow is integrated and the full self becomes inhabitable. I hear that, and I want to say something about it clearly. The work is not the same as the wound. The wound was passive. Things happened to you. Patterns formed without your knowledge or consent. Pain accumulated without your being able to process it. That passivity, that happening to you quality, is what made it traumatic. The work is active. It is something you choose and engage with on your own terms. And that distinction between things happening to you and you actively choosing to understand and metabolize your experience is not a small distinction. It is the entire difference between being a subject of your own history and being the author of your own life. And the other thing I want to say is this. You have already proven that you can survive the passive version of this process. You already went through the breaking without any of the tools or frameworks or understanding I have just given you. You did it raw. You did it confused. You did it without a map. You survived that. What makes you think you cannot navigate the active, chosen, conscious version of the same territory? Especially now, when you actually understand what the territory is. The darkness you went through was not wasted experience. Not a single hour of it. Every moment of it built in you something that cannot be built any other way. The capacity to be genuinely present with suffering. Not the performed presence of someone saying the right words while keeping themselves emotionally safe. The real presence of someone who has sat in the same fire and knows what it actually feels like. That presence is rare. That presence changes people. But it only becomes a gift, truly a gift, rather than a wound you keep reopening when you understand it. When you can hold it consciously. When you can feel another person's pain with your full presence and also feel your feet on the ground and know clearly this is their pain and I am choosing to be present with it, not drowning in it because it is mine. That distinction is everything. And it is learnable, not quickly, not without effort, but absolutely, completely learnable. Here's what I want you to take away from everything we have discussed. You were not broken by your sensitivity. You were broken by the mismatch between your sensitivity and an environment that did not know what to do with it. That mismatch produced wounds. Those wounds produced patterns. Those patterns produced the darkness. The darkness produced the breaking. And the breaking, if you engage with it rather than running from it, produces something that has no adequate word in the English language. The closest approximation is wholeness. Not the wholeness of someone who is never damaged. The wholeness of someone who has descended into the depth of their own damage, confronted every piece of it, integrated the shadow that lived there, and emerged understanding themselves completely. That understanding is power. Quiet power. Power that does not need to announce itself. Power that shows up as the quality of your attention when someone in crisis calls you at midnight. Power that shows up as your ability to say no to something that would harm you without 4 days of agonizing guilt. Power that shows up as the genuine stability you create in the relationships that matter to you, not by suppressing your sensitivity, but by having learned to direct it. The woman in the parking lot at 2 a.m. who could not cry. She did not know it then, but she was not at the end of anything. She was at the threshold of everything. The numbness was not victory, but it was information. It was her nervous system telling her that the old way of carrying her sensitivity, unprotected, ununderstood, constantly given away to people who did not honor it, was no longer sustainable. The question the darkness always asks, whether it comes as numbness or breakdown or the slow erosion of everything you thought you were, is this. Are you ready to stop running from what you actually are? Are you ready to stop apologizing for the depth of your feeling and start learning how to use it? Are you ready to reclaim everything you pushed into the shadow in the name of being acceptable, being manageable, being small enough not to frighten people? Because when you are ready, that is when the rare power becomes available. Not the power to feel more. You already feel everything. The power to know what you are feeling, to know where it comes from, to know what is yours and what belongs to the room. To know when to open and when to hold your ground, to know your own value without requiring anyone to confirm it. That is the power that comes after the darkness, not despite it, because of it. You are still here. Start there.